ගජේන්ද්‍ර කුමාර පොන්නම්බලම් ගරු මන්ත්‍රී ඔබතුමාට විනාඩි 14ක කාලයක් තියෙනවා.
14ක්?
No, sorry, 11. 11යි.
Sounded too good to be true, Honorable Presiding Member. I thank you for at least cutting only 1 minute. Normally I'm used to half my speech getting cut. Sir, we are today taking part in a debate on the President's latest speech to Parliament, where he attempted to brief this House with regards to the prevalent economic situation the country faced, and also in particular with regards to the steps that the government has been taking in trying to alleviate the severe hardships that the people have been facing, and most importantly in trying to revive the economy of the country at large. Now in that respect, Honorable Presiding Member, you would appreciate that when you look at the country in general, one glaring perspective that you can't omit is that of the Northeast, because the Northeast, unlike the other parts of the country, has been a war zone for over 35 years. It has been severely affected, and even before this economic crisis happened, soon after the war came to an end in 2009, what became quite obvious, and something that we, our party in particular, but many academics, many civil society leaders based in the Northeast have been saying repeatedly, is that governments since 2009 have failed the people of the Northeast, particularly because they came out of a war situation where after almost 35 years of having an economic blockade in that area where development was so severely stifled that they were not in a position to compete with the rest of the country. And therefore, governments, it was imperative, had to take note of that special status and to some extent protect the economies of those local populations so that they could be given some time for them to safeguard their economy, to allow it to grow to a point where they can compete with the rest of the country. So that was the sort of prevailing situation in 2009. Of course, not a single government since 2009 to date took those warnings, took the sort of advice that came from the ground, and instead those people were, the people of the Northeast, the Tamils in particular, were thrust deeper and deeper into a situation where they could not compete, where they went into a debt trap. Microfinancing in the Northeast was the first venture that the government permitted soon after the end of the war. So you can just imagine the calamity that the people had to face economically. Now, when these people in the Northeast after the end of the war, most of them got displaced, Honorable Presiding Member. This, I want to specifically mention some places in the Mullaitivu district, particularly in Kokkuturubai West. Places like Sinnakulam, Mundirigai Kulam, Amayan Kulam, Samban Kulam, Tattamalai Kulam, Parayanaru paddy fields, Suryanaraya paddy fields in Vavuniya North, Kokkachan Kulam, and Kachal Samlan Kulam. Now these areas, Honorable Presiding Member, around about 83, end of 83, December 83, 84, the military asked these people to vacate those areas. They asked them to vacate it because they declared those areas no man's land, and that they would be far too vulnerable to crossfire. And it was the Sri Lanka military that asked them to vacate. So these people got displaced. Entire villages, this list of villages that I read out, got completely displaced. And these people could not go back. This was in 1983-84. And the first time they were able to go back to those lands was in 2009 or 2010, whenever the government, of course, didn't allow anybody to return into the northeast because they kept them all in concentration camps in Vavuniya, as you will recall. But eventually, due to international pressure, people were allowed to resettle. And when they started resettling, when they went to Kokkuturawai West and when they went to Vavuniya North, into these villages, they found that their lands had been given away. Lands have been given away to people who did not belong to that district. Sinhalese people who belong to adjoining districts are all of a sudden settled in these areas that they have been cultivating these lands for centuries, for generations. Even today, Honorable Presiding Member, these families own permits for these lands. Now, nothing has happened to these people's lands being illegally taken away from them and given to others. At a time when they had just finished a war, when they were just trying to get up on their own feet, after almost 30 years of economic embargoes, after their lands were deprived of them, when they came back wanting to pick up the pieces, they are told that these lands are not theirs and it's someone else's. That area has been so systematically, the demography changed, that in those areas, consecutive governments since the end of the war had made sure that the local government bodies will eventually change hands from being controlled by Tamils to that of Sinhalese. Now this is the reality that we face. But of course, these Sinhalization projects that took place, pauperizing the local population who had already suffered for over 30 years of war, where their economies had been embargoed, this happened in a blatant way under the Rajapaksas. Because they didn't care. Their form of Sinhala Buddhist nationalism, their form of racism, made it that they didn't care what the consequences were, what people thought about. But what is happening today? Now this House has been debating, several members have been talking about, and in fact, the President, and in fact the President had also talked about Kurundur Male Kaadu, where in a gazette in 1933, 72 acres had been identified as archaeological sites. Honorable Presiding Member, I am herewith tabling 5 documents that show that this Kurundur Male Kaadu was archaeological sites, and at no point was it described or discovered as a Buddhist heritage site. And the first time that it was identified as a Buddhist heritage site was by a letter by a surveyor who was asked to go and survey that area on the 14th of December 2020 as Kurindu Vihare, as the site belonging to Kurindu Vihare. A surveyor, who is not even an archaeologist, had already discovered that this is a Kurindu Vihare. Not one document until then cited this particular site as belonging to a Vihare. Now, I'm not trying to say, Honorable Presiding Member, that this should not be identified as a Buddhist, ancient Buddhist archaeological site. If it is, by all means, it has to be. And it has to be protected. But what has happened? When courts gave orders saying that no new building should be built there, in breach of those court orders, the army went out to build a new Vihare, and now 230 acres of land in addition to the 72 acres is being demanded by the Buddhist clergy, like Ella Vela Melananda Thera, saying that it's only Buddhists who can be settled in those areas. So the original, I'm winding up, sir.
Find out.
I'm winding up. So the original way of grabbing land belonging to the Tamils is now being grabbed in the name of archaeological sites and Buddhism in order to colonize and Sinhalize. This is the worst thing that can happen to a people who have faced a war, who are coming out of that situation, when their lands to try and gain some form of income is being deprived them in this way, Honorable Presiding Member.